So it's fair to say that in recent weeks and recent months, Gran Turismo has probably had more criticism than it ever has done before. It's getting to that life cycle in the game. It's a few years old now. The excitement has probably worn off. People have probably peaked their abilities and can't progress anymore. And like most of us, they're probably getting a little bit tired of the repetitiveness of the daily races, which is its most used feature. We have started to see the same combos rinsed and repeated over the past few months, and alongside that, we're getting a little bit fed up of the game not being able to punish the dirty drivers. Make no mistake though, this game is absolutely incredible. It might not be the most accurate simulator, but it is certainly one of the best racing games out there, and Gran Turismo as an arcade game outfit has made some of the most iconic motorsport games to date. However, I put a post out on all of our social media platforms asking for feedback, improvements and suggestions for the game to take this already amazing game to the next level and maybe right a few wrongs. We got suggestions from every angle, and in this video I'm going to be reading all of those comments and giving my thoughts on each of those suggestions, seeing what could be possible and what indeed could make this game so much better. You never know, Polyphony might even see this video and be able to implement a few of the suggestions. As unlikely as it is, you never know. There's some amazing thoughts in here, so please be sure to watch all the way through, and if you don't mind, drop your thoughts and suggestions in the comments as well. We might even do a part 2 of this video as more suggestions come through as time goes on. This is our chance to evaluate this game and our experiences on there, right any wrongs and take this game to the next level. So with that, we're going to jump into the comments, but before we do, if we're meeting for the first time, my name's David Winter and I run this channel here, Affinity Racing. We're a very small channel, and so if you could show a little bit of support by hitting the subscribe button, you have no idea how much that would help this channel grow as we push forward, just hitting 2,000 subscribers at the point of recording this, and we hope to progress a little bit further on. We're mostly focused around sim racing at the moment, but we want to venture ourselves into karting challenges, real world driving challenges, basically being a shit budget Top Gear, but we've also got ourselves a trip to the Nürburgring planned for the very near future, so if you can hit that subscribe button, you will not miss that. So hit subscribe, and while you do that, let's jump into the comments. So we had quite a few comments around a daily race D, which are probably one of the main suggestions for this video. We'll go through a few of them and see what we think. So Mitch says, a new daily race added, daily race D every week alongside the normal races. Absolutely agree with that. I think many of us have been wanting a fourth race just for a bit more variety. Adam says larger grids as well, but goes on to say make daily race D an endurance race with larger grids. Now, I absolutely agree with that one. We'll talk about larger grids a little bit later on. Splint Driftwood says some dynamic weather in there, and also saying we need a daily race D. It says we're crying out for a 30-minute race, 30-minute plus race format. Maybe throw a real-time quali in there for drivers on the day ability, which I agree with that also. We'll talk about that later. So under 30 minutes, daily race D, more than 60 minutes. Ali saying 24 to 30 cars on track per race, more online races. He's saying daily race D and an E, so 5 daily races. There should be always a Manufacturers and Nations Cup run, and we'll talk about that as well. So a lot of talk there around a daily race D. The only problem I can think of at the moment as to why Gran Turismo aren't doing this, or Polyphony aren't doing this, is that they're worried about the number of people on the grids. When you think about the 3 different daily races and the DR levels that we have, whatever it starts at, DR rating C, all the way up to A+, there is probably hundreds of races going on at any given time. I think that the fear is if they put too many in the categories, in that sort of middle of the range driver ability, you're going to have people ranging from C all the way up to A. There's maybe going to be, as it crunches down in the middle, a bit too much variance in driver ability. I think that might be one of the reasons. The only reason that I can maybe think they're not doing a daily race D is that we're maybe limited actually to the number of people that are playing this game at any one point. I think if we have 4 races, maybe the problem is, and we do sometimes see it with the manufacturers, is that when they're on, or if there's a daily race D and too much variance, the grids themselves start to be too spread out. You might not actually have that many people, if any, at a certain race category or DR category doing Daily Race A, for example. We certainly see that when the manufacturers is on. If you do a daily race while the manufacturers is happening, those grids are very thinly spread. Now, the next comment comes in from Rory, which I absolutely love this one. This was over on Facebook. Perhaps more player interaction for daily races, i.e. put together a selection of ideas, tracks, cars, laps, weather, etc. and put that to a vote. So people in the lobby can vote as they join what they actually want the settings to be. We can't all be A+ racers, but the core players would have more interaction and more fun, I think. I would enjoy slightly longer races or a series, e.g. Spa, Nordschleife and Le Mans as a 24-hour, say 1 hour real time as well, which is another great suggestion, and have the day and night races. Love that. But to go on to the settings as a vote, I really do like this idea. The problem, however, if I'm going to put a dampener on everybody's idea, which is not the intention of the video, is that is almost to a degree the problem I sometimes have with the F1 games, where you go into a lobby, you're not sure which track you're going to do, and then everybody votes for Spa, or everybody votes for Nürburgring or Baku, or whatever the track is, and that might not be a track that you're familiar with, but then you're stuck in that lobby and you have to go race it. Very difficult in the lower lobbies, or when I first joined that game or started playing that game, because I didn't know any of those tracks apart from Spa, Nordschleife and some of the main ones, or Nürburgring GP rather, sorry. Any of the games basically that is often featured in Gran Turismo. So I remember, as an example, the first race I did on F1 24 was the Hungaroring, and as much as I know that track from F1, I'd never played it in the game. So in terms of actual braking zones practice, I had no clue. And I think sometimes as well, you can fall in and out of rhythm with certain tracks. If you go into a lobby on Gran Turismo and you've practiced that race every week, you can be really competitive. The problem sometimes is that if you're changing tracks or people are selecting it as you jump into the lobby, it can sometimes be you know, you can be going into a race and then it basically is a track that you hate, and then you think, oh, I've got to kind of plow on through this race now, and not really wanting to do it. You might have a few people quitting out the races for that reason. Another really interesting point to make is that I had a similar idea myself, and it actually came off the back of Call of Duty. If you remember going into the lobbies, you would actually see people being able to vote, and that was one of the features on which map it was that they were on. The problem being, I remember it specifically with one of the Modern Warfare games, whichever one it was that had the Rust map, that was the one that got voted on every single time. It was really rare to end up on another map and everybody voted for the same one all the time. I get the feeling that that would absolutely be the case with Gran Turismo. If it was a case of suggesting tracks, everybody we know would be voting for the Nürburgring or Spa. It's going to be one of the two. However, the number of laps, the weather, all that sort of stuff, I absolutely do agree with. We should have a little bit more input, I think, as a lobby, and then at least we can say if it rains, we kind of all voted for it. We were happy with that. I do really like that idea, and I would love to see that implemented somehow in Gran Turismo. Rust Y says we want newer GT3 and GT4 cars to be used in the daily races. Now, I absolutely do agree with this. It does feel like the game sometimes can be a little bit behind on those releases, and then we see a new update and it says new cars, and then it's a car from the mid-2000s, which, you know, kind of had no real impact on anybody. So I do absolutely agree with that. I do understand from Polyphony's side of things that they are adding these as free updates. The cost, I imagine, to be able to replicate 3D model and then get the sounds and recordings for the exhausts and engines and everything into the game costs a lot of money. They probably don't see that as being a worthwhile investment. There's a few suggestions in here around new cars, new tracks and all that sort of stuff. And to quickly mention now, I think this is where sometimes Polyphony or Gran Turismo, the business model, if you like, is a little bit flawed. If you remember, again, going back to Call of Duty, you used to be able to purchase additional maps in that game, along with everything else. And so it was worthwhile, Activision or whoever makes Call of Duty, to spend the time creating and developing that. That is where Gran Turismo is a little bit flawed. If you look at ACC, all of the new cars that come on, or majority of them, or some of them, have to be purchased. I presume similar with iRace, and that's all subscription based. Everything that they do is immediately reciprocated with people buying it, and so to them it is easier to see it as being worthwhile. I do think that that is where Polyphony sometimes struggle, is that they put the game out and then we're kind of waiting for a little while for something to happen, and that's where the game becomes a little bit boring, a little bit quicker. Whereas iRacing and ACC can be running on the same model of game for a lot longer of a time because they're always putting out new updates that are worthwhile people purchasing. Hopefully that makes sense. On to the next comment. A simple one from Mitch here. He just says, fix the penalty system. Now, I absolutely agree with this one. No doubt about it. I don't think any of us can disagree that the penalty system gets it wrong probably far too many times. It does feel like the dirty drivers don't get punished, and then when you make a mistake, be it genuine or you clip the wall or you even give the place back to somebody, you're still stung with a penalty that you can't get rid of. It would be good to see some smart recognition, as we do see in ACC. If you cut the track, for example, it tells you immediately whether you've actually gained any time. That recognition in Gran Turismo would be phenomenal, especially for the daily races. Next comment comes from Jason. He says, Australian supercars, first of all, absolutely agree with that. That would be tremendous. And Australian tracks. Phillip Island in Australia is one of the best tracks in the world. Now, that's not a track that I'm all too familiar with. We'll have some overlays on screen to show what we're currently missing out on. And a shout out to Polyphony. If we can add this track, that would be pretty tremendous. Now, we're going to jump into a little bit of a thread around PSVR 2. So those that are racing in VR absolutely agree with it. Pretty much everything we are about to read here. So Gary, first of all, says the PSVR 2 HUD needs to be updated. Absolutely agree with that. I want to go into racing knowing they will be clean. So I think the point there is that other people racing in VR don't have the awareness and then therefore are causing a bit of carnage in the lobbies. And that's not their fault that they don't have the awareness. The information simply isn't there. I do actually think as well, just to suggest, or before I forget to say, someone mentioned previously on our live stream that the VR headset especially should actually have some radio comms, a little bit like we're so used to with ACC. So the car right, car left, still there. You've got them. Such and such is into the pits. This is the gap to the next car. If we're not going to see it on screen, which we don't at the moment, having it in your ears, I think would be absolutely amazing. So Ewan went on to reply and say, this is my biggest moan as well. Surely they could implement another data screen alongside traction control, brake balance, etc. and let you see the delta around the other cars in VR. That is one of the biggest misses at the moment, is the gap between the other cars. Again, I know that they want it to be fully immersive, and in the real world you don't have a floating projection in front of you and you can go through all of your car settings that way. That bit isn't realistic, and I get that, but if they're not going to do that, you need the radio comms to feed that gap, to feed that information and cover that gap. Next comment, Saver of the Universe. Would be nice if they updated the VR experience so you can see the head-up display, so you can see how far behind or in front of you you are, and also who has faster slap as well. That's another piece of information that we don't get, faster slap as well. Absolutely agree with that. Next comment, similar again, Hot Stepper saying PSVR 2 HUD update. Not knowing the distances between the other cars is annoying in generally, but really screws up the longer races. This is important, whereby you are trying to plan pit stops. Not knowing when the other people have gone into the pits is one of the most important pieces of information within a race, certainly a longer form race, and the fact that you don't get that at all is really annoying, other than seeing a car come out of the pits in front of you, or just so happens that you spot somebody going in. However, if you've got multiple pit stops, you can soon be out of sync with the rest of the grid. So that missing information for the PSVR 2, absolutely crucial, needs to be updated, and I imagine it will be in the next few updates. Now, this next comment, a little bit brutal, but Packo Taco says the whole game needs an overhaul. Physics, new tracks, current model race, and penalty systems. There's quite a bit that I agree with. Overall, though, I do have to say, the game itself, let's not make any mistakes, that it is pretty phenomenal. If you actually sit inside the car, especially if you have done any of the VR, the detail that is in there is absolutely sensational. Unbelievable, next level, detail, craftsmanship, or developership, if that's even a word, in terms of the time, effort and energy that has been put into it. I do feel like as we move to Gran Turismo 7 from GT Sport, that difference in terms of certainly the heads-up display, the information, a lot of that felt very samey. It would have been nice to just see some sort of difference, even just the rev counter and the information at the bottom in terms of what gear you're in and things like that. That literally did not change, and that is one of the things that you see most on the game. So it almost felt as you moved over, apart from the change in the physics, that you were pretty much driving the same game or an extension or an updated version of GT Sport. Now, Turndevil came in with quite a few suggestions. Let's quickly run through them all. So he first of all says no penalty for hitting the wall or barrier. Why you get a penalty for hitting the wall or barrier, I will never understand. I can understand in time trials that it will just delete your lap completely because it's unsure, or it's impossible to, I guess, for the game to know on every single corner, every single wall, whether or not you will gain an advantage. I understand that, that's fair enough, but to get a penalty in a race for hitting the wall, where you will have no doubt picked up damage, especially in a longer race or a heavy damage race where you have to go into the pits, so frustrating to then serve a penalty, and just a lot of times can totally ruin your race. Say you go off, you clip the wall a little bit, you're maybe middle of the pack, you can end up with a 3-second penalty, and all of a sudden you're back behind the grid and your race is absolutely done, especially a daily race A or a daily race B. No good. Totally agree with that. On to the next one. He says any penalties or slowdowns over a period of time, not just a massive one in each lap on a straight. Now, I sort of agree with this. I sort of don't. I think if we've got pit stops, you should serve the penalty in your pit stop, but I understand the slowdown thing, and I hate it. I hate that you just have to slam your brakes on in the middle of a track. That wouldn't happen in the real world, but I do kind of understand that there's no other way of really doing it. Because if you just add the time on at the end, say a 5-second penalty, in the race you realistically lose 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds because of the slowdown and then the acceleration back up to speed and all of that time lost. I think if it gets added on at the end, you would just ram your way through the grid and clear 10 seconds on everybody and you'd be fine. You can't always serve it in a pit stop, so that makes that a little bit trickier as well. So yeah, and then I think that the gradual slowdown or the self-serving penalty, we've seen that a little bit in some of the lobbies, particularly on the online private lobbies where you can have that setting, and you don't really have to drive any differently to see that penalty come down. So you can kind of cheat your way through that one a little bit. So I genuinely don't know how they really implement the penalties in a better way. Pit stops maybe, or just a harsher penalty, but it's served or added on to your total race time. I'm not too sure. Any suggestions on how we improve this? Drop them in the comments. Turndevil also said qualifying per race, not the whole race for the week. Absolutely agree with this one. At the very, very least, I sort of understand setting a quali time and carrying that through the week, but you shouldn't be able to use different cars. If you set something in the GTR, that is the only lap time that you can take forward in the GTR. If you then go to an Aston Martin or a BMW or whatever, that previously set quali time should not count. That is an absolute, because people can just jump in a good qualifying car and then jump in a good race car. I do think that it would probably add too much time to the daily races if we did that every time. Maybe it's just a one-lap shootout on a daily race C, perhaps. But I do love it when we go into Manufacturers of Nations Cup and we have a proper qualifying session. Another suggestion was SR should not be affected by wall contact. This should be a DR thing, if anything. I found this out the hard way this week. I agree with that one. It comes back to the fact that you shouldn't get a penalty when you hit the wall, and that's where people's SR is being affected. So definitely need to see that changed in some way. On to the next one. He also said all dailies should have some form of tactics, alternative strategies, not to mention nighttime weather, tuning, open tyres, etc. Agree with that. We need to see a bit more variation. The fact that Gran Turismo pushed so heavily the dynamic weather, dynamic timing, the formation of dry lines, coming off the back of a wet spell of weather, all of that was absolutely tremendous, and we were so excited about it. And then it took them 2 years to actually implement that in the daily races. I can understand how that level of complexity takes a long time to move that online. I get that, but then we've seen it, and we've seen it really well with the Nürburgring Nordschleife, which is the most difficult track and the longest track, and probably the most, in terms of development, the most difficult to implement. So why we haven't then seen that more often on some of the other tracks, a little bit frustrating. At the time of recording this, only the past few weeks, we've probably only really seen a race at Spa, I think, was the last one where we had some weather, but we really need to see that a lot more. And definitely some more progressions on the complexities or the intensity in which we have to apply strategy into the race. The mandatory pit stop, but you don't have to change the tyres. It's great when it really does overlap, and if you change the tyres, you're gaining back the extra couple of seconds, or trying to, and if you don't, then you have to, if you don't change tyres, then you have to accept the tyre wear. And it's great when those two overlap and they're so close. It very rarely happens, and it becomes such a static race. So yeah, a lot more work needed to implement more strategy for sure. Ash David says more customization in the game, a full drag track mode so you can compete with others online with your own car builds. Now, I'm not sure why they actually don't have this. Maybe they do and I've just not discovered it. But this is one of those suggestions that once it's said, you think, what, like, it's so obvious, why doesn't it actually exist? A drag race mode would actually be pretty cool. I'm trying to think of, I think there's only Need for Speed that's probably actually had that. But surely enough, that is a easy-ish feature to implement. When you think that we've got these, the driver meetups and all these little things on there that not many people really use, I do think that a drag race, as much as I'm not a fan of drag racing, but I do think that a drag race feature in this would actually be pretty cool. Aaron has commented and said, daily races with our own cars at PP levels, so that is power performance levels. I do think that they've implemented this. I might be totally wrong, but I do think we've seen in the early days of GT7, they did have that, and then they've sort of removed themselves from this whole power performance tuning thing. And I think that was a bit of a, to be honest, probably kick in the teeth for Polyphony, where they spent so much time improving the tuning of cars, or putting a lot more emphasis and focus on the tuning of cars, and then the feedback from people on the game was pretty much, I just want balance of power and I want to go into a daily race and just enjoy that. I think a smaller portion of people want to go and tune their cars and actually understand how to do that. As much as we've played, or I've played this game a lot now and done so many, probably thousands of hours worth of streams and content and recording, I still don't really understand tuning. That's just the way that it is. And so I think in the early days, they really pushed that in the daily races. And then the majority of people weren't a fan of that. I do think that maybe some form, although you can do it in private lobbies, some form of race, whether that is actually a fourth daily race or a feature there somewhere where you can compete with each other online against power performance and customized cars, would probably be a good shout. So next comment is the horrendous shifting animation. I can kind of understand this. It says it looks so robotic, it's missing that aggression. Now, I do understand, and it is very delayed as well. When you shift up, it's sort of half a second later, you will see the hand go down and then do the gear shifts in the proper manual cars. I do get it. It's one of those things that, in terms of motion development and animation development, so difficult to do, and they've probably got to have movement and an animation that fits across all of the cars as well. So I'm not kind of dampening the ideas here. I just know as well, as much as we're asking for a lot of this stuff, it is very difficult to implement. I do think that the animation probably overall could just be quicker in general. Nobody in a race shifting from third to fourth or getting off the line is shifting really slowly into the next gear and then putting their hands back on the wheel and then doing that again. So I do kind of get it. It's a difficult one, probably more difficult to implement than we think, but I do absolutely agree. One comment here was actually bashing people on pad. It says a lobby only for wheel users will stop a lot of crap, at least in those types of lobbies. Again, I do understand this one, but I'd probably say that's a little bit unfair. People who actually race on wheels, we are the ones that is actually in the minority. I would say a majority of people on this game are actually racing on pad. It is still an arcade game, as much as they say real world simulator or real driving simulator. Majority of people are racing on a pad, and I think if you only had people racing on wheel, first of all, I don't know how the game would know. Well, it would sort of know that you're on a wheel, actually. It does know that you're on a wheel. But to only put those people in a lobby, I think would affect the rest of the user base, I would say. And you're pulling, still a fair portion of people out of those lobbies. I actually don't think that it comes down to pad versus wheel and who has more control. I do actually think that comes down to sportsmanship and racing etiquette, because even people on wheels will still drive dirtily and not adhere to typical motorsport etiquette. So it probably comes down more to that, I would say, than it does people on pad not having as much control as people on wheel. Raced against many people on pad and had just as good a race with them as I possibly could do. And then raced against people on wheel and equally not being as good. So yeah, a lot of that as well that we're talking about comes down to etiquette for sure. Another comment here about up-to-date modern cars. Fed up with racing cars from 2012. I do understand that. Where's the LMDH cars? Physics needs to be far better. iRacing does better, and that was released in 2008. So again, just going back to the whole business model thing as well, I think that is the problem, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. iRacing released so far back in the day, but it is still able to almost be fresh because the updates that it brings out, the new releases that it brings out, the new cars, the new tracks, everything is kind of paid for immediately and their expenses are covered. So that's one of the difficulties, and that is where I do think Polyphony, as much as they are dedicated to Sony and PlayStation, one other suggestion that we had on a live stream was that they should open themselves up to PC and Xbox as well, and I do think being on other platforms would absolutely elevate the game. There is no doubt about that. The difficulty that they have is that they are absolutely assigned to one console and basically, you know, removing themselves from, I don't know what it would be, 30% of the market, 50% of the market, maybe even more. And that's the problem that they've got. They are working on, realistically, as much as they are a multi-million pound revenue business just in Gran Turismo, they are still working on fine margins and fine budgets. So that is the difficulty. And as much as we want all these great updates, and we do get a load of great updates, we sometimes need to be realistic in what we ask for, or maybe we just have different priorities to Polyphony and Gran Turismo. So with all of that said, that is everybody's feedback on this first video of how we improve Gran Turismo. If you've got any extra thoughts that you would love to share, please drop them in the comments. I will absolutely do a part 2 to this video. It does feel, however, that we are all kind of on the same page. We've kind of got the same sort of themes in terms of what we want to see changed, and I think the same gripes that we all feel is the same negative experience, or, you know, results in the same negative experience and ultimately requires the same fixes. And so we're all seeing the same shortcomings or downfalls with this game, but I think we all see the same potential as well, and that's maybe the most frustrating thing about being on this game and kind of just really hoping and wanting the best for it. So with that, drop your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't done already, please do hit the subscribe button. It goes a long way to supporting such a small channel like this. And in the meantime, I will catch you in the next video.